We have been working together for a few years now, and as some of you know, have had the opportunity to get together in person, which many of you have been a part of for Days on the Hill. And we're so grateful for that participation. But this year, we spoke about how can we make this event and access to this knowledge even more accessible across our state, which is a little tricky geographically when we have friends 5 hours away in Memphis and beyond. So moving to a virtual event this year to focus on ways and strategies to incorporate advocacy work into our daily lives felt like the right move. And we are so thankful that we were able to add Jenny Mills McFerrin to our roster today. She's going to get us started and give us a great presentation to start with just a overview of the legislative system and how education and access work within that space. And then we are going to have a quick breakout session. It'll be maybe 5 minutes, and she'll continue before we take a break and go into Barrio prep for their presentation on further advocacy work. But a little bit about Jenny. Again, we're thrilled to have her here today. Like I said, she serves as Assistant Director for P6 Policy and Research for EdTrust Tennessee and leads the development of policy tools and resources. So what she's sharing with you today is a big part of her day-to-day life. In addition, it includes research and serves as a member of the leadership team for EdTrust. She's previously held roles for the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce, as well as a fellow Chattanooga resident for a bit at UTC. So Jenny, I'm going to pass it on to you, and thank you to all the participants for being here. And Jenny, thank you for your help this morning.
Thanks so much, Kelly. I'm really excited to be here. I see some familiar faces on the call and used to early in my career worked in college access. So really excited to be with you all today. I have some slides. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. Can you all see that okay? Okay, see some mods, great. Well, just to kick us off, wanted to first give a really brief overview of EdTrust Tennessee, who we are. So EdTrust is a national organization. We've been around for celebrating our 38-year anniversary this year as a national organization, and have worked historically around issues of education equity, justice, and high academic achievement for students. We're particularly interested in students from low-income backgrounds and students of color. And we have a multi-tiered organizational structure. So we have a national office in Washington, D.C., and then we have a presence in the states that are highlighted on the map on the slide. In some cases, that presence is like a 40-person staff team, and in some cases, that presence is a single staff member. So it varies quite a bit across the org, but we're working in states across the country, including in Tennessee. EdTrust Tennessee was founded in 2020, so we're much younger, and we are really focused on particularly state-level policy and research. Some of the things that we do, in addition to my role doing sort of policy and research products, we also engage in policymaker engagement, do quite a bit of bill tracking and bill analysis, and are really interested in building the capacity of advocates across the state. We convene 4 different coalitions that are focused on various aspects of our work. So our largest coalition is the Tennessee Alliance for Equity in Education, which we'll talk about in just a second. A subset of that coalition is the Coalition for Truth in Classrooms, which is focused on issues of censorship, diversity, equity, and inclusion, both in K-12 and in higher ed. And we have a regional initiative called Southerners for Fair School Funding, working on K-12 public school funding reform in 10 states across the South. And finally, over the last year or so, have been a steering committee member on Education for All Tennessee, which is a coalition dedicated to supporting education for all students, regardless of their immigration status. Okay, so that was a lot. Our big coalition is the Alliance, which is almost 90 organizations across Tennessee. And it's a mix of different organization types that we convene. And one of the ways that we come together is we have a shared policy agenda. And so The agenda is a visionary document about what we want to see for education, equity, and justice in Tennessee. And we have various priorities within the agenda. The agenda has been relatively stable year to year for the last 5 years. And then our partners implement the agenda in various ways. So some partners do that through, legislative advocacy. Other partners do that through their direct programming, data and research, and student voice. So that is sort of a little bit of an overview of what we do and who we are. Our goals for the session today are really just to sort of understand some of the issues at stake this session and discuss resources that we have to offer and opportunities for all of you to advocate from your seat. So first, just kind of wanted to give a little overview about the General Assembly, and talk a little bit about the way that it's structured and the timeline for this session. So the General Assembly proposes, debates, and passes legislation, including laws that affect both K-12 and higher ed in Tennessee. The General Assembly has a really important responsibility to approve the annual state budget. Tennessee, like all states, requires a balanced budget. So Tennessee cannot exceed with expenses the revenue that we have as a state. The members of the General Assembly also appoint or confirm members of various state level policymaking bodies. So some examples of that would include the State Board of Education, the Board of Trustees for the University of Tennessee, the regents at the Tennessee Board of Regents, those types of bodies. This year in 2026, we're in the second year of the 114th General Assembly, which means a couple of things. One, it means that all of the legislation that was filed last year that has not been passed or defeated is still alive. And I'll send the slides around afterwards. I linked a resource that we released last month about some of those still alive bills that are particularly on our radar. But lawmakers can also file new bills. So it's a mix of bills from last year and new bills. And because it's the second year, that means the committee structure, leadership, and membership are all the same as they were last year. So as we think about 2026, big election year for us in Tennessee, we'll elect a new governor. And all of the members of the House will be up. Half the members of the Senate will be up. So big opportunity to think about, to see a shift starting in 2027, but for this year, it will be the same as last year. Wanted to spotlight some of the leadership of the education committees in both chambers. So these are the leaders of the Senate Education Committee, which is a relatively small committee. And then we have the gigantic, so these are the other members of the Education Committee. You may recognize your legislators in this mix. And then we have much larger House Education Committee. These are the leaders of that committee. It's very, very large. And one of the reasons it's so large is because there are 4 subcommittees of this large education committee that each cover different things. So we have the Education Administration Subcommittee, which is focused on things like accountability systems and things like that. We have an Instruction Committee focused on curriculum. We have a Higher Education Subcommittee focused on the needs of our higher ed sector, and a K-12 subcommittee focused on the needs of the K-12 sector. So that's the structure. And so while the House has these subcommittees, that means that all education legislation that's considered has to move through a subcommittee before it can move to the full House committee. And then in the Senate, we just have the one education committee. So every ed bill is just hitting that full committee. I also want to talk a little bit about sort of what we're seeing so far this legislative session. So first, our timeline. The session gavelled in on January 13th. And we are currently in a very constrained, last week was a really crazy week. We're in a really constrained timeline. Because the bill filing deadline, which means all bills that will be introduced this session had to be filed. It was originally supposed to be the week of the big ice storm, and it got pushed back a week. So that was last week. And last week was also the State of the State address, and that is also when the governor releases his budget. So the governor releases a budget, and then the legislature can make tweaks to that budget before finalizing the budget. But a lot of the bones of the budget are within what the governor proposes as part of the State of the State. As we sort of look ahead, we anticipate budget negotiations will start in March and that the session will adjourn in mid to late April. I think people were feeling very confident that it would be mid-April, and then we had a week off because of the storms. And now we're thinking maybe more like late April. But the members of the General Assembly are really interested in ending the session as quickly as possible because they are not allowed to raise money for their reelection campaigns while the legislature is in session, and 2026 is an election year. So they are very interested in ending the session as early as possible so that they can resume their campaign activities. A couple of highlights from the State of the State and the governor's budget that I would point out. So, this was Governor Lee's final State of the State. He's a term limited governor, and so it was really a time for him to sort of reflect on his entire administration, not just the last year. We saw a much leaner set of education proposals in the State of the State this year than in years past, which sort of reflects where we are with the budget for Tennessee. Some of the things that stood out to us: 170 million to Tennessee's public school funding formula increases. We saw investment in summer tutoring and transportation. We also saw the establishment of actually a sort of a trust fund to fund school-based behavioral health liaisons, which has been something the governor's included in his budget for several years. There were a couple of small non-recurring investments that touched higher ed because they're about sort of these nuclear energy workforce investments, but on the whole, higher ed saw a decline in funding support. So we saw a reduction in funding for the outcomes-based funding formula that's used to fund our public higher ed institutions. And that's certainly something that we're concerned about as we look at sort of the budget. And I think that I'm going to pause here and we're going to do some breakouts.
Yes, thank you, Jenny. So it looks like we're probably going to have two groups, and Emily and I will find our way each into one. And the questions I want everyone to focus on, first of all, like what stood out most from this overview of the current session, as well as the state of the state as it relates to education and our role as counselors and admissions professionals within it. And then also thinking through how this might affect your work right now or not and why. And then finally, think through what questions you might still have when we're considering what pieces of the legislative process or current issues that we should explore or address moving forward. So I am going to hopefully do this successfully, and we'll be back in about 5 minutes. Okay. Emily, why don't you join room 1 and I'll join room 2. There you go. You should be able to do that from the bottom.
Yes, got it.
Hey, as folks trickle back in from the breakout rooms, my group had a great quick discussion, just thinking through items that had come up in the past, but also kind of looking for the future um, proposals that Jenny will go through with us now. So I believe she is back in, and Jenny, when you're ready, I'll pass it back on to you. All right, Jenny, I think you were getting back in from the breakout room, but like I just said, my group had a great chat about some interest in mentions that you had for the state of the state, as well as specific bills that may be coming through, which I know that we're going to get to now as you continue with your portion. So I'll let you take it over.
Awesome. And, we're a small group, so feel free to come off mute as I'm going through or put things in the chat. I'll try to catch them, but if I don't, just read them out. I'm going to shift to kind of talk about some of the issues and specific bills that we're watching really closely this session. So share my screen again here. Okay. Everybody see that okay? Okay. So one of the big issues for us is access to education for all students, regardless of their immigration status. Um, and specifically, we're seeing a lot of movement in Tennessee and in many other states across the country around a legal precedent called Plyler v. Doe, which codifies a longstanding practice that all students living in the United States have access to free public education, regardless of their immigration status. In 2025, so last year, we saw multiple bills threatening Plyler in Tennessee, but we also saw advocacy from thousands of Tennesseans that came together to defeat those proposals. One of those bills is still alive. And we've, as we're looking at the bills that have been filed, see two other bills that would also threaten Plyler. So wanted to share a little bit more about those. But first, just as to kind of put some numbers around what we're talking about here. So Tennessee has about 10,000 undocumented students enrolled in K-12 school. And one of the things I want to be sure to point out is that's a very different number than the number of students that are classified as English learners, which is about 84,000 in Tennessee. So undocumented students and English learners are not the same population of students. Undocumented students are a much smaller population of students in Tennessee. And the reason I bring that up is as these bills were being discussed last year, we saw a lot of discussion about sort of the costs of educating English learners, a lot of sort of fixation on that student group. And so really important to point out that those are not the same groups of students. To go quickly into the bill from last year, and apologies because it's a little confusing, we saw a lot of different versions of this bill as it moved through the legislative process. So I'm going to start in the column all the way over on the right. So this bill did pass the Senate. So the Senate has passed the version of the bill that's in the rightmost column. And so the Senate version requires every public school and charter school to collect information on student immigration status as part of student enrollment in school. And then schools can choose if they want to charge tuition to undocumented students. And students can choose to deny enrollment to students if they attempt to charge tuition and the student cannot pay. The version in the House looks different. And there's also an amendment, like a proposed amendment on the bill, sort of where it is in the committee process, and the amendment does different things. But essentially, the current House version leaves it up to the individual school if they want to collect information on students, but also requires every school to report the number of students who enroll without supplying a birth certificate, and then leaves it up to the school if they want to charge tuition. And then schools can choose if they want to deny enrollment just outright or after attempting to charge tuition first. One of the things that the amendment does that's sort of interesting is it says that if the if the school attempts to charge tuition, they have to reimburse the state for the funding that that student is generating under TISA. So different versions of this bill moving through right now is sort of stalled in the finance subcommittee in the House. And so for this bill to move forward, what would have to happen is the House and the Senate would have to pass the same version of the bill. So either the House will have to conform to the version that the Senate already passed, or the House and Senate will have to have a conference committee to hammer out a compromise version of the bill, and then both chambers would have to pass that compromise version. So that's sort of where this bill stands. And then we saw a couple of other bills that were filed as part of a suite of immigration bills from the leadership, particularly in the House of Representatives. And both of these bills are sort of getting at is requiring public schools and in some cases higher ed institutions to collect information on student immigration status as part of enrolling kids in school. House Bill 1711 additionally requires that the state of Tennessee sort of figure out how much money the state is spending on educating these students in both K-12 and higher ed. So these bills threaten the Plyler precedent because Plyler forbids public schools from collecting information on student immigration status. Would also really point out that the requirement to collect these types of documents would not only place a really large administrative burden on schools, but it would affect a number of students who are not undocumented students, right? Like students don't have access to these types of documents for many reasons, including that they may be experiencing homelessness or they may have recently experienced a natural disaster. So these are definitely bills that we're watching really closely and are really concerned about. The other thing I'll mention about these, just for context, is so they each only have one Senate sponsor, but they have like 30 House sponsors. So that's concerning when we think about sort of the potential momentum behind these bills. Okay. Wanted to see if anybody was curious about these. I also wanted to mention the Education for All Tennessee coalition. We have a website. Would encourage you all to check that out. We're intending to host a public webinar within the next couple of weeks. Right now, we have sort of organizations that have signed on to that coalition, and we're having a sort of coalition webinar this week.
I have a question just about how these go through. You mentioned on the last the unbalanced, I guess, support for the two between the two branches. So how typically is that, so is, greater support fostered, mentioning kind of like our advocacy days, for instance, but are there also other things that would be helpful to understand how support for such bills is cultivated and fostered?
Sure. I think I would interpret the set of sponsors on the House side as sort of as more of a symbolic sort of reflection of unity of support within that chamber. I would say, for example, if you're thinking about advocates, one of the things I'll also mention that I think is important about both of these bills is the lead sponsors on both of these bills are relatively, they're not senior members within their party, but they're both facing significant electoral challenges in 2026. And so it appears to be an effort on the part of leadership to sort of position these members in leadership roles on these more controversial and high profile bills in an attempt to aid in their reelection. But I would say if you're looking at the list of co-sponsors and you're seeing your representative on that list, I think it's still definitely worthwhile to reach out to them and express your point of view about this bill. Because sometimes we see the volume of legislation that members have to consider is quite high, and sometimes members sign on to bills not really realizing the full impact of them. And so that can be an important moment for advocacy to make sure that you're sort of helping them understand the concerns that you have as they consider their position.
And Harold, I think I saw your hand raised.
You did. And I was trying to type it into the chat, but
Uh,
uh, I don't know. I'm not so good at writing today. I find so much about that, everything that Jenny just shared. Hi, Jenny. Uh, Very appalling. And I'm just curious, like from a national level, what are some of the trends that we're seeing uh, among other states, maybe even other similar political background states? Are we seeing other bills like these being proposed? Is Tennessee blazing a trail or setting a new standard or inspiring other kinds of bills for other states? Or are we kind of following a pack in some way?
That's a great question. And if others on the call have a perspective, feel free to chime in. I would say last year, Tennessee was um, very much a leader on this issue. So Tennessee was not the only state to have these bills. And versions of Plyler threats have been sort of filed in Tennessee even for multiple years. But we saw last year, the bill that's still alive is really a leadership bill, and that was a different thing. And so Tennessee was a little on the front lines for this issue. We're seeing versions of this pop up in many more states now. Um, and that's been really interesting. Also kind of inspiring because, I think advocates in Tennessee really came together to fight these bills. And that is also sort of a national model for how we can resist harmful legislation like this.
Jenny, I'm not sure how involved you all like end up becoming in the governor's race, but I'm wondering, I'm sure that like many of us on this call have like heard that Marsha Blackburn maybe is potentially the only person running. So when do you expect kind of that communication and campaigning to pick up, and what are y'all's thoughts on like anyone else running against Marsha?
Great question. There have been a number of candidates who officially filed. Um, Off the top of my head, I know current U.S. House Rep John Rose has filed, as has current Tennessee House Rep Monty Fritz in the Republican race. And I believe there's been some Democrats who officially filed as well. So it certainly is picking up. One of the things that will be to sort of first start at the legislature. So one of the things that's going to be an interesting deadline is March 10th, I believe, is the deadline to file if you want to run in the election, the upcoming 2026 election for a House or Senate seat here in Tennessee. So that's when we'll sort of know who has a challenger. And we sometimes see members take more extreme positions at times when they anticipate a primary challenger. So that's something we're closely paying attention to. We have a campaign called Every Student Matters, Every Vote Counts, where we'll be sharing information about the election sort of as it gets closer. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization, which means that we can't endorse candidates. So we will not be endorsing anybody, but we will be providing information on what all of the candidates are saying about their education priorities.
I have another question, Jenny. In the past, as I mentioned, we've done our Days on the Hill. One bill that we've looked at multiple times, and I haven't seen a version, it's confirmed that there's a version on this for the 114th, but is looking at student to counselor ratios for reducing that rate to 250 versus the 400 plus that it currently is on average in the public school system. And year after year, the roadblock that we hit has more to do with, according to the people that we speak with, the budget and the money. And so when you go back and think about that state of the state address with that reduced budget, can you speak on maybe how that comes into play and how the budget is and is not political, right? Like it, in some ways, it certainly obviously is, but in others, it seems like a way to explain something not going through. Do you have any insight on that?
I think that's a really astute observation. I will say, and I'm going to sort of get to this a little bit in the next section. So Tennessee, has had a period over the last 5 to 7 years where we've had really robust revenues as a state, and been able to sort of make some big investments as part of the education budget. And that era is sort of coming to a close. And we can see that reflected in the more narrow scope for the state of the state this year. And there's some really concerning things happening with particularly funding for the financial aid portfolio for the state, that I'll talk about a little bit. In terms of the school counselor ratio bill, that was a topic that came up in our breakout, and I can find the exact bill number, but I believe there was a bill filed last year that's still alive that either addresses the ratio issue or it requires high school to have a certain number of counselors. So I can track that down and send it to you. Okay. I'm going to move us along. Oh, one thing I did want to mention, there's a couple bills that are sort of protecting immigrant students in this moment that I wanted to uplift. So one, this is a bill that we've been watching for the last couple of years, House Bill 30, allows English learners to receive language assistance on the TCAP if they also get it as part of their classroom instruction. And we also saw a bill, House Bill 1482, that would create some protection around schools, the use of K-12 schools for federal immigration activities. And that is a complicated policy issue that I'm not going to go super in depth on, but we're excited to see this legislation. And we finally have a resource hub. This is more in the college access space, actually, for sort of helping folks who are advising undocumented students in the college going process navigate various aspects of that process here in Tennessee. Okay, this is a hodgepodge, admittedly, but I'm sort of grouping it under this big bucket of federal changes that are playing out in Tennessee. So we're seeing at the federal level some big changes. One of those is about the role of different federal agencies when it comes to education, including the U.S. Department of Education. The other one is about funding for large federal programs and cost sharing shifts that are headed more towards state budgets. And then sort of we'll end up talking about Tennessee's budget. So first, couple things I want to talk about in terms of federal agency roles. So we've been seeing some legislative activity sort of around the idea of ending the U.S. Department of Education or having the responsibilities of the U.S. Department of Education shift to the states. This past summer, there was a legislative task force that met on that topic that really focused more on just understanding the different federal education funding that Tennessee receives. But we've seen a bill filed that would create a much more robust version of that task force. It would set up sort of a multi-year entity to manage that process. So that's something we're watching quite closely. We also are major accountability nerds, and so we're really closely watching what might happen to Tennessee's ESSA plan, which is our federal K-12 accountability plan, and concerned about some changes that we may see there. The other thing I want to mention is there's a new sort of federal tax credit voucher program that was created with the omnibus bill passed in July. And this is a big change for the federal government in terms of administering a tax credit voucher that hasn't existed previously. EdTrust Tennessee's position is that we believe public funds should fund public schools exclusively. But we're seeing some bills that are being filed that would opt Tennessee into the federal program and create a framework for its administration. And so we're interested in watching that really closely. We are also seeing just a whole slate of bills addressing voucher programs. And so we've actually created a special tab on our bill tracker that looks at all of the voucher proposals for this year. One of the things I would highlight about this new federal voucher is that there's some debate about whether the funds from the voucher can support both private schools and public schools. The enabling legislation it uses language that would encompass both possibilities, but there's a federal rulemaking process that's unfolding that will create much more sort of certainty around what possibility exists there and how that might work. I also want to talk about changes to SNAP and Medicaid. So these programs are major components of Tennessee's budget. And there have been changes to these programs federally that will start to take effect in 2027. That matters for this legislative session because the budget that we're passing is the FY27 budget this year. So some of these changes are starting to hit our state budget. Also, importantly, Tennessee uses participation in these programs to identify students from low-income backgrounds for accountability and funding purposes. So we use for the group of students that are economically disadvantaged who receive additional funding through our public school funding formula. They're identified as participating in TANF or SNAP, and students who are eligible for school meals are eligible for those two programs plus Medicaid, which is called TennCare here in Tennessee. So we're really concerned that as participation in these programs drops, schools will see reductions in critical funding designed to support students from low-income backgrounds. And so we are running a bill, I've linked the bill here, that would add TennCare into the economically disadvantaged student definition as a protective measure for that funding, particularly for our K-12 public schools. And we released a report called The Undercount that shows this issue in greater light. And like I said, I'll send the slides out. I would encourage you to check out the website. We just launched a dashboard where you can look up the impacts of what this change would do for every school district in the state. So I would encourage you to find your local school district and explore this further. Okay, and finally, this is the thing I think you all are maybe most interested in. We're seeing that the state budget is tightening. We can see that in sort of the slate of education investments proposed as part of the state of the state. I mentioned the concerning decline in higher education funding, but we're really concerned about the state financial aid portfolio. So over the past couple of years, we've been hearing a lot about declines in lottery revenues. The lottery funds almost all of our state grants and scholarships. The one exception, so the one program that's not funded by the lottery, is the Tennessee Student Assistance Award. That's funded out of the general fund. Everything else is funded out of the lottery. So the Hope Scholarship is our big one, but also things like the dual enrollment grant funded out of the lottery. Promise, Reconnect. So lottery revenues are declining. This year, for the first time, Tennessee will have to dip into a reserve fund that exists within the lottery because the revenue from the lottery is not sufficient to cover the expenses of the financial aid portfolio. So we're sort of getting to a crisis moment around financial aid funding, and we're concerned about the future sustainability of the portfolio. So we can see that this is on the radars of several legislators. So we have a number of bills that have been filed that do things like require THEC to write a report about all the times that the portfolio hasn't been able to be fully funded and what happened and which student groups were prioritized within that. We can see that we're certainly not going to see an expansion to any financial aid programs that exist under the current portfolio in this moment. So this is something that we're really concerned about. This is most likely going to be an issue for our next governor and next administration to resolve, but we can start to sort of see the signs happening right now. So I'll pause there because I know that's something that's of major consequence for y'all in the work that you do.
When you talk about in recent years and like the history of this, more conservative investment, Is that a trend that could have been predicted based on who was coming to office, or is it one that has responded to other cultural or political moments within the last decade or however much time that would kind of encompass?
That's a great question. When it comes to the budget overall, this is a pattern that we're seeing across the country. So states had larger revenues. Part of that equation was also, pandemic relief aid that made its way into various state budgets. And so as that is ending at the same time, the economy is facing some challenges. That's sort of creating a perfect storm. And I'll also mention, so Tennessee is more vulnerable to this than many other states because we're very reliant on sales tax for revenue. We don't have a state income tax. And so as a result, when people, are feeling like tightening of their wallets and they stop spending, that has a very direct result on the revenues that we have as a state. When it comes to the lottery, one of the things that I think seems to be clear is that the lottery decline is very closely related to the introduction of sports betting in Tennessee, which occurred, I want to say like 5 years ago. And so apparently this is a trend that other states have observed as well, that people are not participating in the lottery at the rate that they were because sports betting exists. And so that's likely a more like durable and pervasive challenge for the financial aid portfolio than like a potential economic upswing could provide for like the general fund. And that's part of why we're really concerned about it. Was there another part of your question? I feel like I might have missed something there.
I think I've got it. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, one other thing I want to mention. So related to sports betting. So the sports betting funding has been sort of unobligated for the first several years that it's existed in Tennessee. And as a result, it's gone into the lottery for higher ed account. Part of why we're in this moment that we're in where the lottery account is really under threat is that funding was diverted to K-12 school facilities as part of the statewide voucher bill that passed last year. There was a provision included in that bill where if the financial aid portfolio is experiencing a shortfall, the sports betting funding should address the shortfall first before being used for K-12 school facilities, but it doesn't do anything to sort of address the overall financial health of the lottery fund because that funding will only go into the lottery fund when there's a shortfall. Okay. I also just want to give a quick, if you're feeling a little bit glum about the state of policy here, we have a set of bills called the 10 for Tennessee, which are the top 10 policy proposals that advance education, equity, and justice in Tennessee. We just picked them last week after the bill filing deadline, so I would encourage you to check those out. There are good proposals out there too, and those are definitely worth advocating for. And then I want to talk a little bit about some resources. So these are just some sort of general tips if you're thinking about local advocacy from your seat, thinking about relationships in the community and community organizations that align to your values. Would encourage you all to look at our partner list for the Tennessee Alliance for Equity in Education. And also think about your local school board meetings as an opportunity to engage. At the state, recommend that you follow the news and what's happening. Make sure that you connect with your elected officials and build relationships with them and engage with organizations with a statewide presence and influence. We have a couple of resources I want to spotlight. So one, we have a education advocacy hub that includes some information on things like how a bill becomes a law, various public offices, some resources to build your advocacy strategy if that's something you're interested in doing. We have a bill tracker that we update weekly. So it shows all of the education legislation that is moving. And for this group particularly, we have a tab within the tracker focused on higher education access and success. So you can sort of look for just those bills. We also have a weekly legislative newsletter that provides sort of a snapshot of what's happening at the General Assembly. We only send that out during legislative session. So if you sign up for it, you'd get it on Fridays during this time of year. And if you're interested in learning more about the budget, we have a webinar coming up with the Sycamore Institute on March 2nd, where we'll do sort of a deep dive into the education budget for the state. And so I would encourage you all to check that out too. And I have my contact info here. That's it for me. But any other questions?
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jenny. Do we have any questions from any participants? Okay, well, we just appreciate you taking the time to meet with our Tennessee SACAC members, but also for being a great, jumping off point for ways to continue to educate ourselves and advocate for students across the state. So thank you not only for your time today, but also for the work you do every day. It's amazing.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to pass it on to Emily.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us for this first part of the presentation. We have arranged to have a 5-minute break, so feel free to use the restroom, maybe quickly grab your lunch or something like that. And then at 11:35, we will start with the second portion of our programming, which will be a little bit shorter than the first part, but I'm so excited that we have Nicole Alcina Davari and Jasmine Reyes from Barrio Education for Liberation who will be presenting. And they are a nonprofit local in the Nashville, Antioch area. And their focus is really figuring out and redefining what's possible for the next generation of immigrant students and families in Middle Tennessee. So they do some programming with empowering youth and resources and bilingual mentorship. And they're going to do a presentation for us starting at 11:35. I will keep this Zoom live, so feel free to turn your camera off, etc. And we'll get started in now 4 minutes. But if you leave and come back, I'll have you rejoin. Thank you. Hi, Jasmine and Nicole. We just launched into a break, so we have a few people coming back from that break. But you all feel free to get started whenever you are ready. And I did a brief introduction. I think you heard that, Nicole, but feel free to introduce yourselves a little bit further.
Okay, well, let's see. Can you hear me, first of all? And then can you see my screen completely? Zoom is working? That's incredible. I love that for us. Okay, and it is 11:35, so we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, I'm outside and that feels like a gift today. So, if you hear background noise, I do apologize. This is good for my mental health. I am Nicole Alcina Davari, and I'm joined by my co-founder, Jasmine Ramirez. And today we are leading a session with a very long title, but I will tell you why it is very long in a second. Empowering Futures, Post-Secondary Readiness and Leadership for Multilingual Immigrant and First-Generation Students. And we are Barrio Education for Liberation. We have such a long title here because multilingual, immigrant, and first-generation students are not all served the same. They are not all the same. They don't have the same needs, and they can often have intersectional identities, but it's important to us to name everything. And you'll also learn as we share today that we are a Latina founded organization. I myself am actually bi-ethnic, and so I represent my Latinidad as well as my Middle Eastern identity here today. But all of these things are different and lots of intersections of identity, but that is what we'll be talking about. And Jasmine, if you would introduce yourself as I change the slide.
Thank you, Nicole. Jasmine Ramirez, again with Barrio Ed, coming to you from a long background of formerly undocumented individual who went through sort of this journey herself and was really impacted in the way that we want to serve students was through the different lenses that we both bring, but have been sort of in the education space in one way or another for the last 14 years at the intersection of education and immigration.
I myself as well started I moved to Nashville in 2014, started as a classroom teacher in the Antioch, actually first in the Madison area, and then the majority of my time in education has been spent in South Nashville. In many ways, I grew up in South Nashville. I say I spent my 20s here, so it feels like I grew up in South Nashville. And so have been working as a classroom teacher as well as just a leader in the education space since 2014.
And for today's session, we have three very specific goals: is to explore approaches fostering leadership and belonging around multilingual immigrant first-generation students, learning from our model, and then leaving with strategies to building trusting relationships and partnering with students as co-creators of their post-secondary journeys. And I say co-creators because oftentimes we don't bring students along to journey with us in that space. And for us, that's super intentional, bringing students along in their journey as actors of their own.
So, as Emily shared, right, our mission is to redefine what's possible for the next generation of immigrant families in Middle Tennessee by building collective power through college and career exploration for students, amplifying youth voices, and inspiring advocacy, which is what brought us here today. And we were established in 2024, so we are still a baby organization. But our year in review, right? So 2024 to 2025 was really our first active school year. And let me also name, it's like, why am I sharing this with you? Because I know that when I've gone to professional development sessions, I've been like, okay, but who are you to tell me Right. And so this is why I'm saying this is why we have a little bit of legitimacy, right? So we served 42 students in our first school year. We had a 100% high school graduation rate. We had 100% college persistence rate for those students that had joined us through Jasmine and I, as we said, we've been doing this work for some time. And so we had students that we had maybe met through other organizations and the work we've done. And then those students became Barrio Ed students. And so those students that we kind of inherited, if you will, had a 100% college persistence rate. And then three of our students that we had met from other organizations and other work, those students actually re-engaged with us as we started Barrio Ed, and then they re-enrolled in college as a result of the work that we have been doing. I'm like, is this one me, Jasmine? I'll go through our model, right? So our model at Barrio Ed, right, is that we explore college and career pathways. We use student voice to lead change, deliver bilingual, culturally affirming mentorship and programming, and foster community for students by students. That part is very important to us, and that we want to make sure that our students are, as Jasmine said, co-creators in their own post-secondary path, but also co-creators in what Barrio Ed looks like, because we know that if students aren't invested, then we're not going to see the change that we hope to see.
And as we sort of shift from what programming Barrio Ed does to sort of underground work that we've been able to do around advocacy and legislative session in the last year as an organization, but also bringing alongside students. This quote is from one of our students at Belmont. Through the programming offered at Barrio Ed, I learned a lot, including that there have been other young people with the same dream as me, and they have fought for our rights and raised their voices in the Hispanic community. They have paved the way for us, and I want to continue opening doors for young people to share that same dream. And that's super important because every week we are probably getting text messages from our own students that they want to get plugged in, that they want to volunteer, that they want to create change, or that they themselves are mentoring others through the process that they once went through. But for us, it was really important when we were creating Barrio Ed that we wanted to also have an advocacy focus and allowing our students to step up into leadership roles and do advocacy at whatever capacity felt comfortable to them, not only for us as the leaders, but for students to see that they could have a space where this was possible, as we have experienced that not a lot of organizations in the past have been able to provide that space for students on that advocacy lens. So that was really important. If you can go to that next slide. And with that, we are going to start talking about the state legislature and what we are seeing this year, things that we want to keep an eye on. You may have already heard some of these bills through EdTrust because we are following very similar bills on the education lens, but we are also including bills that are not education focused, but that will have an impact in the classroom or with your families that you are working with. So HB 1711, SB 2108. This is the one that we think will challenge Plyler again. As you guys may remember last year, HB 793 was the bill that was a direct challenge to Plyler. And I think it might be in the next slide, Nicole. Yep, there we go. So we'll start here and then we'll go back to that previous slide. 793 was the Plyler bill, again, that required for every child that would enroll in school to prove their citizenship status or their legal status. If a student did not prove that they were a U.S. citizen or a qualified individual, then that school had the option to charge them tuition or not enroll them at all. And that tuition cost would be at the TISA rate around $7,795 per student per year if they were to enroll. This passed through the Senate and it got stalled in the House It is left into committees. We have heard different rumors on whether this is going to actually be brought back up or not. Our hope is that it's not, but with that, we do think that if you can go back to that previous slide, Nicole. But we think that HB 1711 will replace HB 793. So this one, as of right now, is a reporting bill that would come up with the total cost that undocumented individuals or people that are not qualified individuals under the EVEA traditionally for public benefits. And this includes public schools, higher ed institutions, prison, hospitals, and any other social service agency. We know that this is a reporting bill. We are also concerned of the violations for HIPAA, FERPA, and everything else, and what they would actually do with that data, right? Are they reporting it to the new Office of Immigration that Tennessee has now? And what do they do with that information, not only on the family side, but on the student side? So that one is one that we really want to be watching closely. HB 1710 is very similar. This one is verifying the status of those seeking public benefits and reporting. State or localities, local agencies don't actually approve public benefits. That is done at the federal level. So it will be interesting to watch how they go about that one. HB 1709, this specifically, if you are working at the high school level, this will impact you in the way that you are doing college and career readiness for students. As of right now, this is a professional license bill that reverts back to the original bill that only U.S. citizens or qualified individuals under the EVEA would be able to establish professional licenses. We know that this has been faulty over the years with licensing boards, but this is, again, going back to that original version that has been in place for many, many years. Next slide. HB 1704, SB 1779. This wants to criminalize individuals, undocumented individuals, or people with certain status that have violated immigration law. Again, this is asking for states to take authority to create immigration law that only the federal government, as of right now, has the power to do. This could lead to dangerous precedents around states being able to enforce their own immigration laws. And what would that mean for families and students that you guys are serving, both at the local and state level, but also if this family were to be traveling to another state that may have another immigration system at that other state. HB 1708, this is a bill that we see almost every year come up, but that does have a direct impact with students who are trying to get their driver's license. As of right now, you are able to take your driver's license exam in English, Spanish, and a few other languages. This would switch it only to English only, being the only option for you to be able to take that exam. And for those of you that work with a lot of multilingual learners, you know that that can be an issue. Next slide.
So
I will say that the other thing, there are about 40 anti-immigrant bills that we are monitoring. I did not, of course, bring all of them to you, but there are 40 other bills, and one that I don't think made it into this presentation, but there is a few positive bills that we are monitoring. One coming from Senator Ackerberry and Representative Gabby Salinas that would that wouldn't allow immigration activity to be around or near schools, churches, and hospitals. And so that's one that we really want to highlight as a positive bill, though we don't expect it to go anywhere just because of the makeup of the state legislature. We are grateful that individuals are thinking about the impact that this is having around families, specifically in schools.
Thank you, Jasmine. We obviously there's a lot going on, and we know that you had a session before this speaking on those. So if you have like further questions that you want to ask a little bit more specifically about legislation, our contact info will be at the end of this presentation. I'm sure Emily can share that as well. We're a small enough group here that I think if you would feel comfortable coming off mute or putting it in the chat, although I'm not able to monitor it much while screen sharing, I'd love to know like what are the ways that you're seeing past legislative session and current events impact your work with students? Maybe I'd imagine you talk about this in many spaces. So your top priorities or your top concerns. We really want this to also feel like a discussion.
I can share. Hi, everyone. My name's Harold. I work at Vanderbilt with the Stars College Network, work with small town rural students. And I think the main observation that I have, I guess, is about the second part of the question, just about current events impacting work with students. I feel like, as a college counselor, it's really important to me to be seen as someone who's approachable to students and someone that can be trusted, try to bring a warm disposition so that, students naturally, feel like they want to try to connect with me. But through just what's going on in the world. We're seeing families just start to clam up, and I can't blame them, right? Like they are isolating themselves in their homes. They are becoming very guarded with their trust. And I'm a white person, so like I know that just I totally get like why they might not want to just share something that's very personal, with me, just because, can I really actually be trusted? Do they really know me? And I take all of that really, sensitive, very sensitive to all of that. But I think the main thing is that like I have noticed students start to be just kind of less open about what their situation is at home. Um, and maybe stifling some of their college dreams or just tabling those for now. Like, let's get through this period of time and then reassess, and maybe we'll go back to college later on, right? So, it's really it's terrible in all ways, y'all. I didn't have a super coherent thought to end that on, but I just wanted to share like that's basically what I'm seeing is that students are, in my opinion, becoming just more isolated, probably for a whole number of reasons. And I probably don't realize how all this legislative stuff that we're talking about today is really um, the reason why they're made to feel the way they are.
Yeah, thank you so much, Harold, first of all, for just like speaking up and then also naming the thing, right? And so I love to name a thing. I love to tell people I understand why history has made you feel like this, I'm not a trustworthy person, and you're very valid for feeling that way, right? And I've had to do that, myself, and as I move through different spaces as well. Jasmine, but I would love to give the opportunity for you to speak to what Harold has shared.
I mean, I think you're right on point, right? It is becoming a lot harder for students to find that one trusting adult that they can share. We have seen an increase of students' mental health just decreasing overall, especially as they have access and consumption to social media in the wake of everything that's happening in Minneapolis. Um, I just got a report yesterday that for a student that we have supported that is in Arkansas, ICE has showed up on their dorms and has taken people. And so we're seeing all these unprecedented things that our students are having to experience and consume with very little answers that we can provide of safety and support.
And so with that, I think one of the things that we find in our work, we've set out some of the gaps in serving this specific group of students. One of those things is the spectrum of multilingual immigrant and first generation students. One of the positives of Jasmine and I's work together is that our own lived experience happens to cover a wide range of that experience, right? So as Jasmine shared, being a formerly undocumented person in high school in Middle Tennessee. I myself being a first generation student, so the child of immigrants, but not being a first generation college student, but being a first generation American. And so this one size fits all approach is just not it's not going to work. We have to see, we hear about differentiated instruction in the classroom for teachers, and we need to have differentiated advising for this space as well. Educators and advisors are often well-intentioned but underprepared. And Jasmine, will you speak to just the difference between supported and empowered from our seat?
Yeah, so if you can go to that next slide. When we talk about empowered versus supported, oftentimes we give students our support and our ability, but we don't see them as leaders, or we don't give them the opportunity to be leaders, to feel empowered. So again, why does student leadership matter? We all know this, but it looks a little bit different when we're working with multilingual learners. Again, they're oftentimes put in this position of, we are here to support you, but we're not here to empower you. Um, and leadership grows when students experience belonging. Do they feel welcomed in your spaces and classrooms? Can they trust you, and can you trust them to give them? And cultural affirmations, like, yes, what is happening outside, what's happening in your classrooms, we value you, we want you here. Those are all things that are going to be super important as you work with a student in developing that leadership opportunity for them.
And for sake of time, we're gonna keep moving. But we have here different techniques that we've seen have been done well, right? So giving students the chance to lead, as Jasmine said, bilingual college tour experiences. I'll let Jasmine speak to that in a second, and just the power that she's been able to witness. But I really want to, Harold, bring it back to acknowledging the world around them, recognizing current events, policies, or social issues that may affect students. One thing I find myself often saying is, just because you don't reflect a culture, or even potentially speak a common language, or a common home language rather, that doesn't mean that you can't speak and learn culture. And I think that it just takes an extra step. We'll have a quote at the end of this presentation where a student speaks to that, but you're able to learn culture, you're able to learn the variance, the variety within, I'll speak to Latinidad, making sure to not move in assumption. I think we have Bad Bunny performed at the Super Bowl yesterday, right? And a lot of people were very hype about that. I am myself am Puerto Rican, so I was loving it. And also, there are folks that were like, that's not me represented. And I thought about that today as people go into schools and naturally would want to be like, that was so cool, right? To maybe a Latino student, like, did you enjoy the show? And it's like, actually, no. I know specifically at Intrepid College Prep, like, there are kids that are like, no, I don't feel represented by Bad Bunny, because that there's a variety within Latinidad, there's a variety within our different cultures. And so I think being able to take that extra step to learning language is important, and naming the thing, disarming yourself, because at the end of the day, what I want to affirm for you, Harold, is like, yes, people are probably looking at you as a little bit scary in this time. I'm so glad you acknowledge it. And I actually think to not acknowledge it is doing a disservice to students. So, kudos to you. And I think just naming the thing and naming the history behind it is really important. But that also means you need to know the history, right? And so taking a moment to learn that. Jasmine, you've seen the success of bilingual college tours, and I think that would be awesome for this group to hear.
Yes, if you are, again, working with high school students and even middle school students that are getting to explore college, um, being able to provide bilingual college tours is so transformative because it's a way that students can see themselves reflected in that space. And I'll share two examples. We took students to Austin P last year, and we had an all Spanish speaking panel from different ethnicities, but they all were Latinos. We had students crying in that room because they saw themselves reflected. They saw somebody speak their language. And then we went to Nashville State, and this one was specifically for tailored for Afghani students. That we made sure that we had hijabi wearing students come and speak to them, and just magically it happened that our food caterer had backed down, and we had to find somebody last minute. So we ended up bringing Middle Eastern food for lunch, and students just felt like, oh my God, I want to be here. I see myself here, and that really makes the difference. And one of the things that as we do college and career readiness, we also encourage people and our students to write college essays in their own language that they feel most comfortable in. And then figure out, I know it's a little extra step, but the way that ideas flow in their native language, it's really impressive. And how do we work with those students to translate? That information. Google Translate is great nowadays. ChatGPT, I know we shouldn't be use it, but like sometimes we have to use it to support students. But that really has made the difference in the way that we've worked with students to make sure that they have access to college, but that they're able to express themselves freely. First and foremost, it does take an extra step on our end, but if that is what makes a student go into college being able to express themselves in the language that they feel most comfortable, then we will go and do that extra step for them.
I also think there's real power in because I know that I don't know the total demographics in the room of who's like presenting where, but Harold, you working at Vanderbilt and being able to say like, okay, like what is it that I can when in the spaces that I'm in, am I able to advocate for students being able to submit college applications or essays or whatever personal statements in their home language, and then we say okay, we can do the translation work too, right? And I think we always part of our work is supporting students navigating the system, but it's also supporting systems in evolving toward making sure that our students aren't having to always carry the weight of the college application process. And I know we are just coming up on time, so I want to make sure that we um just say thank you and leave our contact information here. That's one of our students. I hope that you'll follow us on Instagram so you can see both our lovely students' pictures as we come up soon on graduations, and but also we'll be posting a lot on legislative session. We post resources, scholarships, really from the educator and advisor side all the way through students and families. Jasmine?
Yeah, and we'll open it up for any questions that people may have.
Stop share.
Yes.
I have a
Thank you.
question. I'm
Yes.
back. Actually, I might have two questions. Um, Jasmine, I think this first question is for you. A few minutes ago, when we were talking about that awful House bill, whatever it is, with the tuition, did you name a figure? And it was like 7,000 something a minute ago.
Yeah,
Could you
so
remind me what you said?
yeah, so for the HB 793, if schools would be able to charge tuition, it would be based on the TISA funding formula, and that set base is around 7,795 per student per year. So if we're talking about a family that has three students, that's around 21,000 per year that they would have to be paying in tuition. I personally do not have that type of money, so I would be trying to figure out how to teach my kids at home or not send them to school at all. And so we see sort of this creation of the second class citizen without education because they won't have access to it. But the ultimate goal is that they want to overturn Plyler.
Got it. Okay. Well, that is sickening. Anyway, um, what was my other question? Oh, I have to admit, I know y'all are like pretty new, pretty young in the neighborhood. I don't know Barrio Ed, and I think it sounds pretty cool. I think I want to hear a little bit more about the 42 kids that you have in college or whatever. Like, where are they going to college? This is awesome.
That's our favorite thing to talk about. So absolutely. Man, well, we have a really solid group at Belmont, which has been really great to see them. We're also starting to see now, because Jasmine and I have been doing this work for some time, we're starting to see this like cycle of mentorship happen. So Jasmine was just sharing the other day with me about how there's, we now know of like upperclassmen that are starting to like peer mentor lowerclassmen, and they've all worked with us. But we also believe in just like being able to create a social circle of some kind for our students. So that is all to say we're spanning the TCATs, the apprenticeship programs, Belmont. We are mostly, our work is mostly in Nashville, so mostly local colleges. Yeah, Jasmine, who else am I forgetting?
No, I think, yeah, local colleges, some private universities. Um, we do have a former student at Vanderbilt, Christopher, if you remember, Nicole.
Oh yeah,
He's not
Vargas,
that
right?
well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We have a freshman there right now, and so he's awesome. And so that's the thing too, is like as we believe education is a right, we make a point to fight for a no cost college education for our students. And I don't want to toot our own horn, but we're pretty good at it. And so I think like we've been making sure that we are giving we're going through all the financial aid packages and applying for all of the things, because we really do believe that our education is the weapon that can never be taken away from us. And right now we are having to arm ourselves as an immigrant community. And so I appreciate the question. Would love to connect with everybody. I think it was Maria or someone who mentioned wanting to connect. But yes, like definitely reach out to us. Our email and our Instagram DMs go to both Jasmine and I. So if there's any other questions, happy to take them.
Yeah, and we'll take maybe one more question if anybody has it, and then we'll hand it back over.
I have one in general. Are there any ways in which, so I work at an independent school. Do you have any, opportunities set up for people who might have the capacity to help out in different ways? Or is that something that you're looking to add in the future? Just curious what other ways we can step up, especially for your students.
Jasmine, you want to go ahead?
Yes, we are always looking for mentors for students. That's big. If you have a connection, if you have any support or time that you can give, that's always a great way to just get involved with us. And we know that our students are always asking us to connect them with people and resources in specific fields. So that's just also a way that you guys can get plugged in.
Jasmine and I are really still like we're fine tuning our ability to read each other's minds, because I was teeing her up for something else completely. But we are also going to be working very closely as a part of the Ed for All movement with Turk. And so I think there's going to be an opportunity to show up at the Capitol. Call your legislators, get informed in that way. And so we're looking at, when we think about this undocumented student bill, where families may be in this position where they have to pay for school, we are really going to be looking at needing our educators at every level of organizations and across the board to say, like, we won't educate students unless we can educate all students. And so there may be times where we say, hey, like, strike is upon us.
And I think Nicole lost signal. So the call to action is that we will be calling on you during legislative session. There will be many opportunities to get involved. It is starting to pick up. They will end in mid-April and then go back home to run their re-election campaign. So there will also be opportunities to engage in election work and how do we inform students on their power to one, either vote, but also if they can't vote, how to still engage in those opportunities. Well, appreciate you all for allowing us to be here and present with you all. Please reach out to us if you do have any questions. And then I will turn it back to whoever is facilitating.
Yes, thank you so much, Jasmine and Nicole. I will tell you in person soon. Thank you. We really appreciate you all joining and just like the wealth of information and kind of spreading the word. I did put in the chat before a couple people left. I dropped two. Well, it's the same document, but a PDF version and then just a Google Drive version, which has a wide variety, Vario Ed included, but also just other Instagram accounts that are very helpful to get involved, stay involved, and just like maybe you aren't the best at researching, but I know that many of us will tend to open up our phone on Instagram, and if there's something that we like see political, hopefully those accounts will help you kind of stay informed. As well as there are a couple of events that I linked on there. We will make sure that everyone who registered gets this recording, the slides from Jenny's presentation, the slides from Barrio Ed, and then also the resource sheet. Thank you all so much for joining today, and I hope that you have a great rest of the week. And then feel free to send any questions if you have them. But thank you guys so much. Have a good week.